Dudley the Deceitful Engine. Before this video begins, I just want to make sure everyone sort of understands why I based and named this character the way I did. And also just make sure y'all understand that this is not the Dudley made by the Berry Truck. This is a completely different OC. I was first introduced to Dudley after watching Bluebell's 5529 and seeing this engine on screen now. He looked interesting, and at the time I was working on a Blue Train with Friends remake of Edward's Day Out, and so I thought adding him into the background wouldn't hurt too much. And after asking some of my friends who are also in the Thomas fandom, they asked, is that Dudley? I didn't know who Dudley was, and this was way before I actually started watching like fan content, and from what I heard, it was a decently dark story. So I looked him up on the Blue Train with Friends fandom, and if you didn't know, the Blue Train with Friends story is super dark, like Sodor Fallout level. I saw Dudley as a character with potential for a bunch of different stories. And so I made him a full-fledged character in the coming years of my series. And eventually, I finally caved in and watched the Dudley stories. As much as I love what the Berry Truck did to him, as y'all know, I don't really like the idea of killing them off, or if I'm gonna give them stories, they are not going to disappear like that. They're gonna come back eventually. And so I completely made Dudley my own. He has a much more thought out backstory. He has much more deeper reasons for doing what he did. But yeah. And although I adapted him into the Berry Truck stories, although heavily modified versions, as well as a few added ones, he's ultimately a very different one. And then not long after, I found out he was based on someone in the Berry Truck's real life, which was when I was like, oh lord, I'm gonna have to figure out a way to change him entirely. At the time, I didn't think much of it and was like, okay, I don't care, this is my version of Dudley, this is my AU. And after a while, it just became like Dudley was too associated with, well, Dudley to be anything else. I didn't want to change his basis, and I couldn't really find a different suitable name. If you want to give me name ideas, I'm well open to that, as these are very different engines. The only requirement is that it starts with D, preferably. But ultimately, he's a completely different character, my Dudley, from the Berry Trucks, with a completely different story. The Berry Trucks Dudley is much more, sinister, evil, deceitful. He's Dudley. But my Dudley has much more layers to him. He's like Shrek from, Shrek. He has layers. He's like an onion. So, yeah, my Dudley is, he's more jokey. And when he is deceitful, he's a lot more noticeable when he's lying, although somehow he gets away with it. And when he does lie, he very much does feel a lot of remorse and guilt. Ultimately, these are two different takes on an O2 OC, and ultimately this Dudley is my Dudley. No disrespect to the Berry Truck at all. Like I said, I love what he did with Dudley, but ultimately, this is my AU, and as you know, I like to adopt a lot of different people's stuff into my own. So yeah. With that, I hope y'all understand why I committed such a crime, and I hope you enjoy the video. Dudley was built in 1923 as part of the batch built directly after the LNES formation from the grouping acts. He was on a branch line in the LNR with a horrible manager. He rarely repaired the engines, constantly verbally abused them, and there were a handful of punishments that were very extreme. Dudley had no friends at the time and only a handful of allies he could talk to, and even then, they were just allies. That's why when the Northwestern was looking to purchase one of the 3 O2s on the branch line, Dudley seized the opportunity and ran away to Sodor before any of the other 2 could. The LNR was suspicious about his eagerness to get away from the branch, but they had more pressing matters to attend to, and so they couldn't investigate it. On Sodor, Dudley became one of the main jokesters of the main line, along with Thomas and Ajax. He took over the heaviest of goods trains, but occasionally took passengers when Allegretti or Alfred was out of commission. Then in 1931, as discussed in previous videos, the Depression Acts had him sent away. To his horror, he was sent to his old branch line. However, to his surprise, Hayes, the son of the original manager, had taken over and reworked the branch to be one of the best performing in the country. He caught up with old allies who became close friends. Life was good for a while, until an omen of death came to his branch line in 1940, the now dubbed Glasgow, or as the Sudrians knew him as, the Bad Engine. The same bastard that killed over 100 people out of spite against Gordon. Dudley was quick to lay into him, but somehow, some reason, Glasgow didn't yell back. He simply took it, with a solemn expression. Dudley was confused, and when he asked Glasgow about his response, he simply said, "I've changed. I've gained a new lease on life. I want to make amends with everyone I've wronged. And I do mean everyone." Dudley scoffed at this for a while, he simply ignored the monster of an engine, or at least that's what he called him. However, after Dudley had a very close call with a mineral train saved by none other than Glasgow, he finally sort of allowed him to be his friend, and they started to catch up. Then in 1953, Glasgow was purchased by the Northwestern, and Dudley thought he would be the next, as around this time Sir Charles Topham Hatt had begun purchasing all the loaned engines that helped out the railway in its early days, as well as a handful of others who helped him during different time periods. However, the manager had sent Jeffrey in place of Dudley, but he told Dudley that the Northwestern bought Jeffrey instead. Dudley was heartbroken. This would be for the worst, as soon resentment festered into pure hate against the Red Engine, and as the dieselization took over the nation, Dudley had to adapt or die. He became aggressive, and many times he sabotaged the diesels to his gain. The guilt was immeasurable, and it took a heavy toll on the goods engine. But ultimately, his tactics would work, as in 1982, he sabotaged Diesel 199 and took a train to Sodor. He thought this was his savior, but he had two forces stopping him, Jeffrey and Bear, engines that had taken his place. Through a series of actions, he scrutinized the two engines, and soon the latter was on the forefront of being sent away for Dudley to stay in his place. But a pair of shunters would lift the curtain on him, and instead of being cocky or begging as you would expect, he simply told the truth, slightly teary, but calm and clear. He finished his confession, telling everything about his life before Sodor. He finished his confession with this: "I understand why you'll send me away, but I hope that you will remember me. Not for my actions this past week, but for who I was before this." He left Sodor that evening, and soon would end up in a scrapyard. But a few months later, he would gain a second chance when a pair of ghosts of a distant past would pay him a visit, and then a daring rescue by a certain red tank engine. It took a while, a lot of wounds to be healed and trust to be built, and a lot of therapy for multiple engines, but he eventually returned to his jokey self from the Depression once more. He is now a very kind and jokey engine who knows so many wrongs, but dares not to do any, for he has learned the pain and cost of being a vagrant engine.